Thank you so much for joining us on the language of love. I've been really excited to talk to you about your beautiful book, Briefly, Perfectly Human. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, it's been a New York Times bestseller. I know you've been all over the place. I was following you. I've been following you for a while, even before you wrote the book, as someone who has been through her share of grief and loss. But it's been really beautiful to watch, you know, things explode in such a positive way for you. How has it been, this journey to a best-selling author and all of the things that come with that? I've been there too, so I know it's a whirlwind.
Absolute whirlwind. I did not know that you'd been along for the ride. Thank you so much for your support over the years, even though I couldn't see it. Yeah, it's been a ride. It's been a ride. I've consistently held my core beliefs about the work and how it shows up in the world and how I want to do it. And I think staying authentic to the message, despite other messages about how to talk about death or what we should be focusing on, I think as long as I stay consistent with what I believe and how I speak about the word, then everything is okay. And turns out it's going okay. And I've been doing a lot of deep breathing.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of energy
Yeah.
coming at you, I'm sure. So I'm really grateful that you're taking the time to talk with my peeps here, because Lord knows I talk a lot about grief and grief healing and different philosophies on the afterlife, but we actually have spoken very little about the topic we're going to talk about today, death, and in particular, your journey as a death doula. And, as you write about in the book, we have all sorts of resources automatically for navigating bureaucracies or getting tutors or a wedding planner or a real estate agent or whatever. But we don't really, it hasn't been historically normalized to have assistance with death. And that's where the death doula comes in. So let's just start there. What is a death doula?
A death doula is a non-medical, really, really important, non-medical and holistic support person for the dying person and their circle of support through the process. And so no matter what they're struggling with, that's non-medical, we can support them with. When I say dying person, I mean anybody who's come into recognition of their mortality. So that means even when people are healthy and they've started thinking, oh, shoot, one day I'm going to die. I need to start getting my stuff together. We can help them create comprehensive end of life plans or work through their ideas about fears, about anxieties, about death and dying. When people know what they're going to be dying of, we can support them in creating the most ideal death for themselves under the circumstances. And then after a death, we can help family members wrap up affairs of their loved one's life. So we're doing all the practical, emotional, logistical support around dying.
Yeah, I thought it was really beautiful. You described it as like the death doula provides a ring in the circle of support that radiates outward like the rings in a tree trunk, so that you're really giving that logistical and emotional and even imaginal, like thinking, planning support,
Yeah.
dreaming. And that's a weird thing to say when you're thinking about end of life, but dreaming into how you want your death to be. And there's so many stories in the book that kind of show that journey that you've taken with so many of your clients. I had never thought about, I do remember reading, you made a comment that I thought was really powerful. It was something like, if you're old enough to get a driver's license, you probably should have a death plan. And that just occurred to me as you were saying, it could happen. You could want to work with a death doula just upon really connecting to the fact that you're not going to live forever.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that someone might work with a death doula before getting a terminal diagnosis or being kind of in the process of dying. So what's the earliest you've worked with someone, in that process?
There was a 19-year-old who came to me. Her father was elderly. I believe her mama died when she was much younger, and her father was elderly. And she had been sitting with him, going through some of his possessions and talking to him about the end of his life. And that made her think about the end of her life at 19 years old.
Wow.
So we sat together, I know, and we did her entire end of life plan. Like we talked through all the things. Back to the idea of the driver's license, folks have the opportunity to choose whether or not they're going to be an organ donor right on the driver's license. And that's a conversation about their death. but it's not really informed decision making because people haven't spent any time thinking about what that means or harvesting my organs or which organs or am I comfortable with this process. They just think, yeah, that'd be a great idea. Check it off at the DMV. It's a death conversation, but a full one isn't being had around it. I was able to have all those with her. It was really rich to be with somebody so young who was so steeped in the reality of her mortality.
Yeah, and how could you not be with an
Right.
elderly father and a mom you'd already lost? I do remember with all three of my boys being, getting their license with them when they passed their driver's test and having a very brief conversation, not the one you just described, about like we didn't talk about specifically what organs would be harvested and how, but we talked about that. And there's all worse and so immortal and infallible. It was a really abstract concept for them. You're right. That is a start to the conversation. And it's not a conversation. We talk about all kinds of things, but it's sort of, I relate to this so strongly. And I think you're a similar kind of personality to me that, um, I've spent my life talking about taboo stuff in the sex world and as a sex therapist, talking about sex in the public realm. Death and sex are two things. There's probably more things, but those are two of like the biggest things that people are really uncomfortable talking about for different reasons, but are taboo topics. And so I was actually going to talk about this probably later in the conversation, but for some reason it's coming up now. I was really inspired and I thought you so beautifully shared because so much of the book, guys, if you haven't read it yet, it's kind of a woven story of Elua's life, your wild ride in your life, which is a really beautiful story and beautifully told. And woven into that are many of these stories. So it's the trajectory of how you became a death doula, how you started off as a lawyer and how things evolved to get you to that point, but also, which I want to get into, but also this idea of how you, especially after your family moved to the United States, how you really started experiencing the racial prejudice you did and the experience of being othered in that way, in that horrible, all the painful ways. And how I was wondering if you could speak to, we're going to get into the evolution of how you came to be a death doula, but also just that this idea, because I have found this true in my life. I was othered in a very different way, being a white, cisgendered woman, but being the only Jewish family in my little town on the Bible Belt. And so I was very aware that when I decided to become a sex therapist when I was 21, and all my friends were like, aren't you worried? Because this was back in the 80s, when it wasn't normal to talk about sex. And they were like, aren't you worried that people are going to think you're weird or judge you? And I was like, I've been weird and judged my whole life. I've been an outsider. So I don't have that limitation. I don't mind being weird. Weird is
Mhm.
normal for me. Being othered is normal for me. So I'm just going to do what brings me passion and what I'm inspired by and activated by the fact that why the hell is no one talking about this? And I felt a thread of that in your story as well, in your version of it, obviously. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned all of those things because being othered shows up in so many different ways. And one of the benefits of freedoms of being othered is that we don't have to try to fit into the box. I
Never
tried
did.
for some time. Never did. I
Yeah.
tried it though. I
Yeah.
really did try.
I did too.
I really did, and I ended up in depression. A legitimate major depressive episode, a clinical depression, when I was still working at legal aid that necessitated me taking some time off of work. To this day, am still the only lawyer I know. Well, actually, there's one other lawyer I know who's taken a medical leave of absence for work because of mental health. Like it just was not going to work anymore. And that break from work turned out to be really, really incredible for me. I mean, it was great for me just to step off the wheel for a minute and think about the life that I'd built around myself and the fact that it wasn't working for me and my attempts to make myself fit into a very dominant paradigm about what I'm supposed to do with my life and how I'm supposed to make money and the relationships I'm supposed to have and how I'm supposed to feel about my uterus and all of the above. Just none of it was working. None of it was working. So depression was like a big, red stop button for a while. It allowed me to stop everything and just to pull back from the life that I built. I went to Cuba during that leave of absence where I met a fellow traveler on the bus who had uterine cancer. and we talked a lot about her life, and then we started talking about her death, and it became really clear to me how important it was for us to be talking about mortality. It was a freeing conversation. It was a rich conversation. It was a taboo, air quotes, conversation, but one that we both desperately wanted to have, but I think didn't know we wanted to have until we were having it. And so when we
Mhm.
think about death and sex as taboos, I'm like, yeah, but people actually want to talk about it. Like we say,
Desperately.
right? We
Yeah.
say that they don't, but when I mention what I do, people always are like, well, girl, and they want to share with me what happened when
Me
somebody
too.
died. Listen, and then they are in. And so I'm like, maybe it's not as taboo as we think. Maybe
Yeah.
we just need a little bit of permission to discuss it.
Yeah, same
Um,
as sex, right? Like maybe in public forums, people are scared to talk about it, but in conversation, it's crucial and it's so central to our being. And I'm so glad you brought up that pivotal, a lot, because one of the themes for me, and maybe, and I believe for you too in the book, is your experience with depression. You went into, as you described, a really dark place. And as someone who has personally experienced, profound depression in my life, and family members and children who have struggled with it, you wrote something like we're all just a phone call or a diagnosis or a chemical imbalance or a crisis or an accident away from a physical or mental disability that will make us not want to live anymore. And I just thought you wove that in so beautifully, but also how when you did, I think the woman's name was Jessica, the one that kind of you met in Cuba who had the uterine cancer. I think that was her name. But that there was this line where you wrote that talking about her death brought you back to life.
yeah, 100%. 100%. In a conversation about mortality, I think is where we really meet ourselves because we find out what we value, who we are, the expectations of others that we've heaped upon ourselves. Because when I'm thinking about my death, I'm going to be the only one who's there reckoning with the choices that I've made in my life. At my death comes the end of everything I've chosen. And so I better have chosen well for me, for me. At my
Yeah.
death, I'm not going to have to, I mean, hopefully still won't have my student loans, but at my death, at least I won't think I spent my entire life as a lawyer trying to cram myself into these suits and into courtrooms and trying not to cry when things really moved me and wanting to talk about trauma and healing and pain and absurdities of life and not the strict letter of the law.
Yeah. And you talk about sort of, I guess it's that line from that song, live like you're dying,
Mhm.
and that's a big part. I feel like that's one of the major messages in your book. I mean, even in the title, briefly, perfectly human, this idea of, or the subtitle, even more, making an authentic life by getting real about the end.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said was that, witnessing death has a bulldozing and purifying power. And as someone who witnessed, I was with both of my grandmothers and both of my parents, and even my kind of spirit mama, my mother's best friend, who was like my second mom, as they transitioned, which I didn't realize until maybe the third or fourth person. Then I was like, wow, this is kind of unusual for people
Mhm.
that, who aren't professional death doulas. And then my 16-year-old, who I found dead in his room, I wasn't with him as he transitioned. That was a very different death. But Lord knows I can feel in my body what you mean by the bulldozing and purifying power. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, explain what that means to you.
Yeah. Well, for starters, that many deaths to be around is significant. I think for anybody, particularly somebody who hasn't chosen this as a path.
Yeah.
Right? This sounds very painful and incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And also, particularly in a society where there isn't much of a conversation about how we care for our dying and how we're with dying, which means that, you probably learned on the job, which I
I did.
did. Yeah,
I did.
absolutely.
But
That's so tough.
it was, but it was strangely beautiful. My first death was one grandmother, and my mom was with me. The two of us sat with her. Her son, my father, ran out of the room, and they unplugged the respirator. So my mother and I stayed with her. So she wasn't conscious. when my mother was terminal, she was the next one to go. And she's the one who really taught me what to do because I know, I was such an empath and such a parentified child already. I was her caretaker from the time I was born, her emotional caretaker. So I was a kid and still a grown up who was very attuned to like what everybody needed. It was part of my survival. But she was very clear, like, no, but she even said to me, nobody will talk to me about dying. Like and I was like, okay, tell me all the things. And she's like, well, I want this and I want that. And you got to do this with your father. And you got to make sure no woman gets the jewelry. And, blah, blah, she was like telling me all the things. She went on and on and on. And at the end of that, she's like, oh, that felt so good. I think I'm going to want to do that again. And I was like, all right. Cause I was so desperate to do anything to be with her. And she taught me so much about it so that when then my other grandmother died and then my father and then my spirit mother, I I had accidentally been a little bit trained, by my mother who said to me, she had so many regrets, which is, one of the things you speak to, so many regrets about her life that we spoke about a lot because I had about 4 months with her before she died. But she said to me, I haven't done a lot in my life that I'm really proud of, but I'm going to die really well. And I never forgot that. So that was sort of my foray into it that made the other ones become almost this sacred. I know what to do. I know how to navigate this. I can hold this, but also obviously holding the pain of the loss at the same time. But I would have never seen myself as someone who was comfortable doing that.
What a gift.
Yeah. So
What an absolute gift. I mean, I think all the time that we teach other people how to die based on how we are doing it, you
yeah.
know? And I heard you say that you were parentified from a young age. And sometimes I think that parents also have an opportunity to continue parenting through their death by teaching us how to do it, despite what they did with the rest of their time.
Yes.
If they're like, these are the things that matter to me, this is what I need, this is where to find the safe, things
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
are
All
so
that.
helpful. Yeah, because that's stuff that now you understand the value of it, I'm sure, after her death, and as you were doing all the bureaucracy, you saw all the stuff and, all the things that were necessary to do, which hopefully means that you will not recreate the same in your own life. But that's just for, like, the practical things. I think also with, like, the surrender with which we approach the end, and how we navigate the difficulty of dying. I think that's also a teaching, a lesson that we can impart. Sounds like a really powerful initiation, and I'm grateful that she gave that to you because utterly a gift. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. I felt it as a gift at the time, and we had such beautiful. And I was clear, I think, and you speak a lot in the book about the perspective of helping, the people transition, supporting them through really what they need moment to moment from in their environment, but also helping them kind of design as much as they can their own death, from what music is played to what they're wearing to where they die to how they, as much as we can control it, especially because I think, a lot of the stories were people who were terminally ill or, in the process of dying. And that had never occurred to me. It's so obvious when you think about it, but that had never occurred to me to do. And I think it's something that is worth, for all of us, because through that, and I was wondering if you can speak to this too, through the process of which is, I guess, the point, through the process of thinking about how you want to die, you're also thinking about what's really important to you. And then that begins to inform how you want to live.
Bingo.
Now
That's
you have
it.
to read the book.
Yeah, book over, podcast over, we're done. That's all of it. That's
Yeah.
all of it. When I'm thinking about my death, it brings everything else into my life in really, really clear focus, you
Yeah.
know? If I think that tonight is gonna be it, then who do I wanna be today? Who do I wanna be today? It allows me to be more honest with my words, more intentional with my actions. I think also more in awe of this really brief gift of life that we've been given, and allows me to see my values. Like, I can see my whole life so clearly when I'm looking at it through the perspective of my death, which is why I encourage people to do so so often, even if it's not somebody who's getting close to the end, at least that they know of, and they're just starting to think about mortality. I'm like, it's useful. It can be activating for sure. but hopefully it will activate in a way that is useful, kind of like a perm rather than something that fries your hair. I don't know why that analogy just came up, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Hopefully it's useful. It can be useful.
Yeah, it is. And you say, I love, you wrote that we don't actually lose. It feels like when you think about dying, you imagine losing parts of yourself as you're dying, but you're actually becoming more of who you are. And we're all dying, obviously, but you're talking about when someone is in the active phases of reaching the end of their life, and that we can do that now. It was funny because as I was reading that part of the book, I alluded to my son. I talk about my son dying all the time on this podcast. It comes up often, obviously, but it was really when he died at 16, very suddenly and tragically. I had these very, and I've talked about this on the show, but very major kind of metaphysical moments after he died. And one of them was where I heard a voice ask me, that wasn't mine, do you want to live or die? And I realized that it really was a choice, not that I would kill myself. That wasn't something on my radar even then, but that I could just stop living or let myself go into inflammatory disease or whatever else. And I very quickly was clear, no, I want to live. And then I had this extreme, it's almost impossible to articulate in words, but a physical experience of the profound gift it is to be here and have this life. A lot, it's a longer story that I won't get into here, but what ended up happening is that in many ways, that profound, and it's very similar to what you talk about with going into death and being with death, that experience, all of it, not just that moment, but everything that came after that and everything I went through to heal, set me completely free, where I'm just interested in living. I don't have time for small talk. I don't have time for bullshit. I don't like, it's just about living and cherishing this one current life that I've been given. So I was really struck by that when I was reading what you were describing about dying, because I haven't come close to death personally, but being with that profound, impossible loss of him in particular, because my other loved ones were, ill for a long time. And in many cases, I was holding the relief as well as the grief, but with him, it was so profound that it created a similar result to
Yeah.
what you were describing.
Yeah. I mean, grief that acute and intense is a form of a death.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know, there
and
a big something in you died for
yeah, for
certain through
sure.
that. I
Yeah.
mean, even when I think about the relationship of the parent and child, but even in hearing you talk about this, it's clear that you went through a death process
I
yourself,
did.
not of the physical body, but of many other parts of who you were. And grief has a beautiful way of allowing us to meet ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, you can really see what you're made of when you're in grief, and I don't mean it like, "Oh, are you gonna pass or fly high or win or succeed?" But I mean rather like, "Who am I, like, at my
Yeah.
core?" Because
Yeah.
it strips away so many things that we thought that we knew about ourselves or the world or our belief system or spirit or whatever else, and that's something that I want to encourage people to be with their grief in that way. Yeah, it's painful. It's very, very painful, and also there are a lot of gifts in it as well. Like it's a fertile soil from which seedlings of self can grow again, provided we allow them to do so. And the seedling might grow like thicker, richer, more entangled with darker, lusher leaves if we allow it.
1,000,000%. Absolutely. And I try constantly to give that same message. As scary as shit, and you feel like it's going to carry you away. And most of us want to, I've now met thousands and thousands of parents like us. And so many of them, when I'm with them, it feels like every cell in their body is clenched so that they
Yeah.
don't to feel the pain. But what I keep saying is like the pain is the path to how you get set free. If you are brave enough to go into it, it's grief is a transformative portal. It will absolutely burn away everything that doesn't matter. It will move you up the trajectory to the next level of consciousness. It will bring infinite gifts that you would happily give back to have your
Mm.
child back, but that are beautiful, amazing gifts, just the same. But you got to be courageous enough. And it's similar. I mean, I'm talking about this because it's all intertwined in my mind. The grief and the death and being with death, which is essentially what grief is, as well as love. I think it's profoundly transformative. So what constitutes a good death? Like, people are always saying, how did they die? What do you say about that? Because I feel like that's a really important part of the conversation for people.
It is, and that I think a lot of people are really focused on achieving that good death, and I'm using air quotes around both achieving and good, because death is not something that happens to us, like it's something that we do, but it's not something that you can win necessarily, you know? Death is, it's absolutely neutral. I think sometimes when we place the value judgments around good or bad death, we end up diminishing the experience of the person that was dying, and sometimes also traumatizing the people that were around that witnessed it. Also, the idea of a good death is very individualized. I know many people that would like to just be minding their business, walking down the street and get hit by a bus and then have it be over. To me, that sounds awful. I would rather have some awareness that death is coming so I have time to wrap up my affairs and smell an orange with real gratitude for the fact that it exists because I know I won't be able to longer. Good death is really based upon a good life also. And
Yeah.
it's important that we remember that even the folks that die in violence and trauma and overdoses and all the deaths that we don't think of as the good ones just on their face, when there has been some honor given to their life for the lives that they led themselves, we can transmute that into a death that still is deserving of the same honor and sanctitude and sacredness and beauty and all those things that serves as a period at the end. Sometimes that period is a little messy and jagged, but it's still a period at the end of their lives. And let's do our best to take the judgment away from how they died, but rather focus on the life that they led. That's the best that I think we can hope for, particularly when talking about violent or painful deaths.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be so hard for those left behind to contemplate. But we're going to get into, I definitely want to get into like what's part of what should be part of a death plan. But I want to ask, I just have a question that I wanted to ask you as someone who has ushered so many through the transition. And you alluded to this in one point with one of your clients who kept mumbling that she needed her suitcase. But with every one of the five people, not Sammy, but the five people who I was with when they transitioned, in every case, except I guess my grandmother who was unconscious, but the other ones who were still semi-conscious or conscious, they all said either I need to put on my shoes or it's time to go. It was like I learned after my mother. And then when it happened with my other grandmother and then happened with my father, that with all of them, there was this moment not long before they actually died where they felt the need to go somewhere. And I know there's no universal law to death, but I was like, wow, do they know? I mean, we don't know the answer, but this is my question inside my mind is like, there's a part of them that knows it's time to quote unquote go. And like, they're like, let's go. We got to put on our shoes. We got to get our suitcase. Like we're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you
There's
see that often with your clients?
so often. We're
Yeah.
taking a trip, and it's
Yeah.
almost always in the language of a trip or something.
Yes.
I had
Yeah.
one client that was really concerned, she had a lot of anxiety because she didn't know where her ticket was,
Yeah.
you know? She was
Yeah,
looking for
she
her
knew she
ticket.
was taking a trip and she didn't know where, like they know they're semi-conscious. All these people were on morphine or pain meds and they weren't like fully conscious where you could have conversations with them, but they were like, it's time to go.
Time to go. Where are my
Yeah.
shoes? Suitcase, gotta get out of the bed, we have someplace to go. It might be part of the terminal agitation, although the agitation sometimes looks a little bit like anger and frustration, but sometimes I feel the agita in it, of the it's time to go somewhere, but their body can't move like it used to, and there is actually nowhere to go, at least that I can see with these eyes. But the fact that it's always couched in the idea of a trip to me is
Yeah.
fascinating.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that, and also this idea of like, which, obviously is a huge part, I'm sure, of what you do, but supporting others, because there's only been that one death, and all the other deaths, I was one of those who was, in the immediate family. But with my spirit mama's death, I was with her and she started talking about wanting to put on her shoes. And I was like, oh
Yeah.
shit, here we go. I said to her, her daughter was still, I mean, she was clearly terminal, had started morphine, she was on her way out. But her daughter, obviously, this was her first death and they were extremely close and she was having a hard time letting go or acknowledging, she was still hoping that some miracle might happen, which I didn't not, I wasn't unsupportive of that. But when I said to Sasa, which is what I called her, are you ready to go? Are you ready to let go? Are you ready to go to God? Which is how she would describe it. And she said, yes, I'm ready. And then I just somehow knew that because of our prior conversations and how worried she was about her daughter, that she wasn't going, I mean, obviously she'd eventually have to let go, but that she wasn't going to easefully let go unless her daughter told her. Like, I just somehow got that message that she needed to hear from her daughter. Like, I could tell her till I was blue in the face it was okay to go, which I do think. I'm curious what you think, but I have found in all of these cases, my little N of 4, that it really makes a difference to say to them, everyone's going to be okay. You can go. We got this. We love you. You'll never be forgotten by us. We're going to speak your name. You can go. You can be in peace. We love you, and just keep repeating that. But I knew that Sasa needed her daughter to say that. So I went over to her daughter and I was like, I really think she's ready to go. I think you need to decide if you can say that to her, that it's okay to go. And she went over and she asked her mom, are you ready to go? And her mom said yes. And so she said the things and then she died. And I'm just curious, asking an expert now, because I've never had a chance to talk to an expert about any of this. Is that, like, how do you handle it? Do you feel like that's an important, not that you have to force the family to accept it and give the person permission, but is that a piece of what you do?
I think the conversation around dying is a bit of the permission, because I find that so often folks haven't had the opportunity to talk to the people that they really love and care about their end, because it's often met with, or you can keep hoping,
Yeah.
or, let's try this instead, or don't give
Yeah.
up, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Miracle could
So
happen. Yeah.
a miracle could always happen.
Yep.
And so it is an element of it to just create permission by having the conversation around dying. I think, however, on some level, it's wildly important that we, the living, I'm using air quotes around living, are the ones that allow the dying the permission to go,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, that we also have to let them go. And
Yes.
sometimes by saying it's okay to let go, I think in some ways I'm also making it okay for the dying person to let go. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
yes, I'm giving, yes, dying person, you can go, I'm gonna be fine. But also living person, I let you go. I
Yes.
have to
Both.
let you go. Yeah, both
It's
things are
our
evident.
unwillingness to be with it and unwillingness to let go. Yeah, that's even more what I'm speaking to,
Yeah,
that
okay.
they need to know that we, the living, are going to be okay.
Yes, absolutely.
That
And
we have to let them
there's
go
this
inside
there's this
ourselves.
phenomenon that happens all the time where, somebody's in the hospital or they look like dying, but it's just been days and they're just hanging out in that liminal space for a while. And the minute the son or daughter or partner gets up and goes to the bathroom, and then the person
Oh,
dies.
yeah, what's up with that? My dad did that.
Yeah, I think they finally have the space to do so. They're free.
Like, get the hell out of my head, get out of here so I can die. I
Stop
mean,
looking
like
at
he
me. Stop looking at it. I need peace, okay? So they get up, they excuse themselves for a minute, and then they're gone. They're gone. And I see so many people feel so bad about it.
I know.
They're like, I wish I was there. And I'm like, no, she probably didn't want you to be there, which is
That's
why
what
she
I assumed.
got out.
I assumed my dad intentionally waited until I left or went to sleep. I said to his caretaker, wake me up if something changes. And the next thing I know, she came in and is like, he's gone. I mean, of course, she wasn't going to know, his breath had been the same, that slow, when's the next one going to be kind of thing. And he waited until I went to bed. And I knew that he did that intentionally, but I never understood why. Like, why wouldn't you want your loved ones there? But it makes sense. Get out of my face.
Yeah, stop looking at me. Why is everybody looking at me? I'm probably gonna be one of those that waits. 'Cause I
Yeah.
don't really enjoy being the center of attention that way. Like, I want them around, but I want them kinda talking to themselves over there. I don't want everybody looking at me. I think it might be hard to, like, finally shed this mortal coil
Yeah.
with everybody being like, "She took a
Yeah.
breath." Leave me alone.
Yeah, my dad was a narcissist. He liked being the center of attention,
Interesting.
but I don't think he liked being in that vulnerable, that kind of, that was not in his power in his mind in the mortal sense, so I could see him not wanting to let go in front of
Mhm,
us,
mhm.
not wanting to give up, so to speak, even though it wasn't really giving up. I
Right.
want to ask you about this death meditation that you describe in the book as a way to be with your own death and be with mortality, I guess, in general. I was wondering, it's, the 9 contemplations on death that you describe. I'm wondering if you can get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So the Nine Contemplations on Death were written by an 11th century Buddhist scholar named Atisha. And the fact that they were written in the 11th century and still ring so true today is because they're the truths about death that kind of underwrite our entire condition. They'd been developed by Roshi Joan Halifax and Larry Rosenberg. And then I developed them a little bit further for my purposes. And so I'm not going to remember all 9 right now, but the first or several of them is my lifespan is ever decreasing. Death comes whether or not I'm prepared. My body's fragile and vulnerable. My loved ones cannot save me. My material resources will be of no use to me. And the one that hits home for many people is my own body cannot help me when death comes.
Mm.
That one hits really hard for many.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's important that, as we think through the contemplations and the way that I do the death meditation is we start with the first contemplation and talk about kind of what it means and have people breathe in and breathe out certain phrases or mantras in order to ground them in the reality of that contemplation. And then see which ones really tickle something uncomfortable inside them or make them feel some type of way, because that's where all the treasure lies.
Mhm.
Because if I say something like, death has many causes, and that makes somebody really uncomfortable, then it's important that we spend time in the rest of the meditative experience being with the different ways in which they could die. Because let's sit with it, see what we have to learn from it. It's a
Yeah.
really useful experience, I think, for many people.
It sounded to me like, and I'm curious if there's a place and a way that we could direct people to experience it, maybe
Yeah.
even audio, you can let us know, but it's like a very gentle, systematic desensitization, like where you are scared of something, but this takes you through the process of really being with it
Yeah.
and getting accustomed to it and wrapping your consciousness around it in a way where maybe by the end, I guess the intention is to take away some of the fearful, anxious unwillingness to be with it charge around the concept of your own death, which I'm sure prevents many people from doing the things they need to do to prepare for their own death.
Yeah, and also prevents people from properly, fully living their lives as well, because they've never taken the time to learn from what their fear of death is trying to tell them about themselves and about their lives. I think of it similar, like a bit of an exposure therapy, but also in the way like, what I notice is that people seem so much brighter afterward. They seem so much softer, so much gentler than before, because death can be really anxiety provoking for many people. But then when we're able to, like, be with it and somebody's clearly saying, your organs are shutting down, but you are safe, I
Yeah.
think that allows you some space to be like, "Okay, maybe it might be okay after all. Let's find out." Yeah.
Yeah. It's
We
very
have
cool. You have
we
them on your website or on where can people find if they want to try it? What's the
great.
best way to try it?
It's called Grace in Dying. It's available under the courses tab of our website, but it's a 9-part meditation series, and we suggest that you do them 9 days in a row based on the 9 contemplations of dying to see what like comes up, what's tickling, what's uncomfortable, but also plenty of space to like sit with it, talk through it, journal through it, etc.
Yeah, I'm going to explore that. Yeah, that sounds really cool. So what is for someone who has a loved one who is terminal or dying or, in the process or just, maybe has a loved one who's ill and may, and they're starting to think about that person, letting go of that person. What for the person who's dying and those of us who love that person, what guidance can you give? You're not, if you're not a death doula and you're just your average Joe or Jane, what do you recommend? What are the things that we can do to support our loved ones who are in the dying process?
Well, there are several different answers and places to go, but I'll start with the practical because I find that for some people it's much, much easier to talk about how to prepare their things and get their ducks in a row. But I find that almost always talking about the practical leads to the rest of the stuff. So let's start there. Wildly important to get clear on who's going to make your decisions for you in the event that you can't. So
Yeah.
the person that's going to be your medical decision maker or your healthcare proxy, and then have the conversation with them about your desires for life support and the kind of care and treatment you want to receive at the end of your life. Additionally, the types of things that make you comfortable, like soft lighting, and by all means, do not play any yoga music at my bedside. I'm going to sit up and rip the thing out of the wall, get clear on the things that bring you comfort, the things that you might want, identifying your most ideal circumstances to surrender into that deep, 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 great surrender. Consider also things like your body, your services. What do you want done with your body after you can't use it no more? Do you want a burial, cremation? Do you want to be turned into a diamond, a rock, a record? Like there, a firework. There's so many options. Just even talking about cremation, let alone a burial, green burial, aquamation, natural organic reduction. There's so many options.
Who
So talking
knew
about
there
what
were so many options? I didn't know.
so many options. And when we don't spend any time talking about them, we leave the decisions to the people that we love that are in the midst of their own profound grief around your death. It's doubly cruel.
Yeah.
So have those conversations about what you might want. Talk about your services, talk about your possessions. Yeah, we understand that you should get a will or things of the sort that deal with the big money or the big ticket items. And I get that in wills often they'll say and all other earthly possessions, but be clear on what you want with your collection of like elephants. I have all these elephants around. What are they supposed to do with them after I die? Well, you can donate them or you can get rid of them or you can take them. Just any direction whatsoever is helpful. Also, dependents or pets, disabled adult dependents, who's going to care for them afterward? What should the person who takes care of them know about this dependent of yours? And with pets, remembering that the person that you give the authority to may have the right to euthanize your pet. Thinking also about any important biographical information or data, like where's your birth certificate? Where's your social security card? Where do you have accounts open? Do you have any retirement accounts? Do you have passports for multiple countries? Just do your
What
best
are
to like,
what are the passwords? Where's your porn collection? And should you
yes.
dispose of it now?
Where are the toys? Where are the toys? Who do you want to know that you have that many toys? Like, get clear on that stuff beforehand so that you don't give other people the surprise of their lives after your death also.
Can imagine I found quite a stash of cannabis in my dad's house. That was interesting.
Was it a surprise?
Well, I mean, I knew what was a surprise is that he had put it in tin foil in a series of plastic bags in the tank of his toilet. That was what the surprise was.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, dude. And the funniest part is the only reason I knew that is because he had shown my oldest son who was like 23 or something at the time when he had gone down to see him. He said, "Come here, look at this," and shows him his stash of medicinal cannabis. But yeah, I can imagine that there would be, and so that's, I think that's can't be overstated, the importance of taking care of your own business, even the stuff that you think, because Lord knows anything can happen anytime. The next minute isn't guaranteed for any of us. So even if you don't have an illness or whatever else, and you're young and healthy, like we were saying earlier, if you're old enough to have a driver's license, I think it's really valuable and really beautiful. I think it can be to, if you're willing to kind of not only think about the logistics, but the things you were saying about the music and like I remember reading and you were sharing some of your death plan in the book and how you're going to you want to hang all your jewelry on trees and on branches and just have people come and, your loved ones and friends come and pick out what they like and like pick it which was such a beautiful image.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be so nice.
Yeah, I
And
would
so
I would really, really like that.
yeah. And from beyond the logistical, thinking even of those loved ones I've had who I've sat by the bedside, is there any words of advice about how, I mean, besides acknowledging what's happening, obviously you can always hold on to the hope for a miracle, but it feels like it's also important to hold both the truth of where that person is, if you want to be a support to them,
Yeah.
and the hope.
There's a lot of different ways to go here too, depending on the nature of your relationship and how open this person is to having these conversations. But, acknowledging it is a really, really powerful place to begin. Asking if there's any concerns or fears or questions that they have. Another really important conversation to have. I think also focusing on things that they loved about their life. What did you love? What are you proud of? What do you wish you would have done? Making space for a conversation about regret. But I think mostly making space to, honor the nature of the relationship, but also the life that was lived and
Yeah.
allowing them to speak to what their life was. Because an important part of dying is reconciling our entire lives for what they actually were, not what we wanted them to be. And
Yeah.
there's grief in it and there's sadness in it. And sometimes there's frustration in it and sometimes there's joy in it, and allowing people that chance to like talk through their experience of their lives to allow them to start to wrap it up is really powerful and a great gift to give.
It really is. And this isn't probably what a good death doula would do, but wearing the hat of a therapist who works with so many whose parents are no longer here or who have recently lost their parents with whom they had really, a lot of difficulties with. By no means am I suggesting that you batter them with all the ways, they did you wrong at the end of their life. But I do think that I have found, even for myself, that there is tremendous value. Like, I made a decision when my mom was dying and then with my dad as well, that I don't want to leave anything unsaid. I have the gift of knowing they're going. And so if I'm going to think about anything that I want to make sure I say to them or complete with them in a loving way before they go, not that you can't have those conversations remotely when they're no
Mhm.
longer here, but, like I told my dad, you know, I forgive you for
Right.
these things. Like, these are the things that I'm acknowledging right here out loud that you did or didn't do or led to or catalyzed in me. And I forgive you. And I even thank you, because if I hadn't had all those fucked up things happen to me, this wouldn't happen and that wouldn't happen and this wouldn't happen. And, I probably wouldn't be here today helping as many people as I have if it weren't for the ways you wounded me. So thank you. I literally had those conversations, and for the ones left behind, I feel like there's tremendous healing. You can't necessarily have that conversation with everyone, but I do think there's a version of that conversation that everyone can have where it feels like there's very little left unsaid for
I
those who
think that
left behind.
that's definitely the ideal. It's definitely the ideal to not leave anything unsaid. I also seen very many times where some folks feel like they've journeyed as far as they can with the person. Either the
Yeah.
person is not open to or capable of receiving them, or it's causing anger and frustration and agitation nearing
Yeah.
their dying, but they still have things that they want to say. I think that what's most helpful is that we start that process long before somebody's dying.
Yes.
Like I'm practicing speaking my truth all the time so that if we get there, there isn't anything that I haven't said. And
Yes.
next, also reaching a place of peace for myself with what it was that I did say or the things that I was able to create with that person or not able to create with that person. So that when the time comes, I am at peace regardless of what was said or not said. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just from your perspective, I'm just curious about you in particular. What is it that you think? Because a lot, just the way you were describing your different cases, and I think you even spoke to it directly. This idea of like being so conscious and careful not to project your own shit onto anyone, and like no matter how they showed up and what was coming up for them, like the theme is always just like you do you, and immediately meeting them, like you seem to be able to so seamlessly meet each person where they are, regardless of where it may resonate or not with you. And I do that as a therapist, but I had to have the crap desensitized out of me, in training to get to that place. And I just was really struck by how seamlessly you do that. And maybe it's because you've lived such an international life as a child, like maybe that's part of it, that you had all these different cultural experiences and and realities to be part of. But I'm curious what you would attribute that to, as because it seems to be a quality of your character as much as your work.
It might be, it very well might be. I mean, I think also there's an element of those of us that get to be with people that are dying all the time where we grow our capacity for compassion.
Yeah.
Because in order to honor somebody in their dying, I'm honoring exactly who they were in their life. I'm allowing them to be human. I'm allowing them to die and have that be okay. And that means if they were human, they fucked up plenty
Yeah.
and they were awful plenty and they this and they that. And I'm honoring all of it in their dying. So if I'm able to do that adequately in their dying, then I don't see why I shouldn't be able to do it also when people are living.
Yeah.
If I'm able to do it while we're living, I don't see why any of the systems that keep us disconnected from one another can still exist. It's really, really hard to deny the humanity of the person who is living on the street. If I can think, gosh, one day they're going to die, that's somebody's mom, that's somebody's daughter, that's somebody's sister, that's somebody's somebody. Because when I'm doing it for people when they are dying, I see the whole of who they were. And I can carry that into my life as well. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to sugarcoat it because occasionally, sometimes I'm in line at CVS and the cashier is taking too long and I just don't have it. But you know what I mean? Sometimes road rage also happens. But for the most part, if I can remember like that compassion to allow people to just be human, to not have to be superhuman, to be fallible and to be really messy and to make mistakes and to be right about their mistakes sometimes, wrong and strong. If I can allow them just to be human, well, I actually think that that could be the most transformative way to be in the world. Like, I think it could break down all the systems, but I'm a
I
dreamer.
agree. I
Okay.
agree with you. You're
Okay.
preaching, and I think it's such a beautiful gift, and it's it's kind of a circle. Does it come from being with those who are dying, or does it come from they feed each other? But it's really true, and death is the great transformer. I totally see that and have experienced that. I wrote down, I guess it's a few sentences, so like a paragraph, but I just want to read it because it resonated so deeply with me. This is from your book. Without our deaths, none of it would matter. There would be no context for what we do. When we live in relationship to our mortality, it adds direction to our actions, truth to our words, rapture to our experience, authenticity to our being, and maybe pounds to our hips. We can make choices that resonate with the core of our being, free from society expectations and the judgments of others. So beautiful. And really like the truth of, and maybe, what I was talking about earlier with that impossible loss of my son, like, yes, 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 yes to every one of those. And I guess that's was my way of being with my own death, because like you said, I did die when he died, a part of me. And I also really fully on every cell level understood that no moment is guaranteed. The next moment is not guaranteed. So I could die in 5 minutes myself. So no time for bullshit. There's something unbelievably glorious about that.
I think so too. And also something really glorious about being able to sink into just the basic experience of being human,
Yeah.
which being able to do that effortlessly and be in awe of it is an utter privilege. And like all privileges, I will want to exercise it in the direction of good.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna be with like, wow, I'm human. I'm human.
Yeah. We're human. We get to be here. What
Yeah.
a gift. What
Yeah.
an
And that
unbelievable
means
gift.
we also get to die.
Yes, we do. And I thought we could end, you don't have to go into the whole thing because it's such a beautiful, I think it was in the epilogue, not in the final chapter, where we talked about the jewelry, but where you describe what you want to experience at your own death. Because I think it's such a gorgeous and creative model of what the rest of us might create for ourselves.
Sure. You mean the glitter wave mostly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Tell me about
okay.
the glitter wave.
Gladly. Okay, so just backing up a little bit into my dying. Again, I have no idea if this is the way it's gonna go unless I choose it, and let's see what happens. But ideally, and I think about it this way because of thinking about it, getting to imagine my death does bring me some calm after a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So I'm at my dying. and hopefully I'm on the deck outside. Nobody's looking at me. They're not looking at
No
me.
one's looking for your
Don't look
next.
at me. Don't look at me. But they are together and they're chatting amongst themselves, and there's a big thing happening in their lives, right? I am dying, and I am not trying to center myself in their experience, but I kind of see how it goes. They love me. They're there. It's going to be a big deal. I want to hear running water. I want to smell some Nag Champa incense. I want to have a blanket on me. I don't want to wear a bra. I want to no bra. Socks on my feet for sure, because I want them to be warm. I want to die with my affairs totally in order. I want to die and surrender. And when the people around me notice that I'm not breathing anymore, I want them to clap because I died really, really well. I want them to clap with the the beauty of the life that I lived and also the grace with which I eventually let it go. And just as they're clapping, I am starting to feel all of the human sensations that I felt in my body, all just starting to gather up in my body again. Like I'm feeling what it tastes like to bite into a delicious, perfect cherry, or look at my partner in the eyeballs, or like when he gives me a little kiss and I feel shivers in the place that he kissed me, or like the warmth of sheets when they first come out of the dryer. Or all the little experiences in life that I've really enjoyed. And I'm feeling them all in my body. And just where I can't take it anymore, I explode into confetti glitter that goes everywhere. And I see all the experiences that I had as my life as pieces of glitter falling slowly, and they will gather in larger concentration around the people who loved me because they will remember the things about me, like my love of brass and copper jewelry, and the fact that I can't remember lyrics to any song. I get them all wrong. They will remember those things, but the other little things about me, maybe my book touched somebody at some point, maybe something like that will stick with them, and the rest will just be enveloped back into a big glitter wave that goes on for all of eternity in every direction I can see. And maybe the afterlife is just riding an eternal glitter wave. That would be great for me.
Yeah, that would be
Biodegradable glitter, of course, biodegradable
that
glitter.
got to be biodegradable. Although in the fifth dimension or 12th dimension or wherever it is we go, it doesn't really matter.
Utterly irrelevant, but it's pretty is the point.
Yeah,
It's very,
that's
very
the main
pretty.
point.
Yeah,
And all the little pieces of your impact. You mentioned at some point in the book, there was this scene that you were describing where you were reading Anita Morjani's book. She's a dear friend of mine, and I just adore, I mean, her story, Dying to Be Me, is just so gorgeous. You said it jumped off the shelf at you, which I think is
actually,
cool. Yeah.
actually.
But one of the things she described in that book is, she had the near death experience and came back, was that, and it reminds me of this, of your glitter vision in a different way, is that she said, once again, trying to put the impossible to describe into words. The metaphor she gave was she saw this huge, glorious, brilliantly, impossibly beautiful tapestry, and she could see her thread flowing through the tapestry, being part of the picture. All the other threads it was intertwining with, touching just for an instant, rolling with for miles, like all the different ways her unique thread wove through this humongous infinite tapestry. That was the image I just thought of that as you were describing the glitter wave, because it's the same thing. It's like all those pieces of glitter are all those infinitesimal, teeny, and humongous moments of touching the people around us and the human experience. And just really, really beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
love it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
I
so
love
much.
it too. It brings me peace, and so I stick with it.
Amen. May we all get as comfortable and free as a result of our own impending death as you are. You're a beautiful, inspiring model to me, and I know so many others. Testimony, your best-selling book. Obviously, there are many, many, many people who want to hear this message right now, and I'm so grateful for what a beautiful messenger you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
You. Thank you for your work in your world, in the world, and your willingness to show up in the way that you are. And we're going to put your Going with Grace, your website, and all your socials in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to share where people can find you, or anything else you think is important that we know?
Website is a great place to find out any information about death doula trainings or retreats or opportunities to engage with your mortality or places to learn or just to expand the idea of your death and how to care for people through it. Website is a great place to be.
All right, perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you for
Thank you.
joining us.